that everyone's coming from. It's quite a mix. I'd love, before I kick off, to get even a better sense of the room and understand, amongst everyone here, who's interested in starting their company and who's interested in commercializing their research. You can just feel free to just pop it in the chat, saying me, and this is the area I'm working on. It could be neurosciences, it could be drug discovery, whatever it might be. But would love to know. I think you all would also love to know if you yourselves are working in areas that might benefit each other. So I'll let you pop that into the chat as we go along. Okay, I can already see a few coming in, which is awesome. So let me tell you a bit about myself, and then we can dive into this thing around spinning plates. So my journey has taken me through a few different places, a few different countries, and a few different roles. And I'd say all of it is really woven together by the mission of solving some of the toughest problems that we face today, whether that be in health or in climate, but through science and through innovation. Myself, I grew up in India, which is also where I did my first gig in management consulting. Spent about 4 years doing that, a solid foundation, but definitely a job with diminishing returns. And I'd be happy to share more if anyone's considering that route post. I moved to the US thereafter to do my master's. So I did my MBA at Yale, which is where I also worked with Yale's tech transfer office. So I guess that would be the equivalent of OSI, OUI, or Cambridge Enterprise for you all out here. And where I got a chance to work with both professors and postdocs on commercializing research. So that was really the trigger for me, I'd say, because the next 5 years I spent at IBM commercializing AI with their Watson team. And I did that both in the New York City office and in the London office, working with largely healthcare companies and financial services companies. And in a few different capacities, as a product director, so building products, as a sales lead, as well as chief of staff to the head of the unit. I think it's really through all those different experiences that I realized the value of research and the impact that it can have. But I think I also realized that entrepreneurship and business is perhaps one of the best vehicles to realize that impact at scale. And you might have questions as to why, but we can talk about that later in the Q&A. So it's actually this belief, which is also shared by my business partner, Alessandro, that I joined him to build Wilby as a home for entrepreneurial scientists. And I'll tell you a bit more about why. And for that, I'm just going to quickly share my screen so you have better context. Can everyone see this? I assume no, so that you can see it. Great. So I think in true investor speak, we are long on science. I think so is everyone out here. Otherwise, you wouldn't be dedicating half your lives making the discoveries that you do. And I think it's fair to say that modern scientific progress has been the bedrock of progress for countries and the world for well over a century. And we've seen this through satellites, radars, computers, vaccines. But I think a lot of these innovations have been brought to life from the public realm or within the realm of research and industry collaborations. But the path of science entrepreneurship is still wildly underexplored, I would say. And you can just look at the stats for this, and you all will be aware of this more than me. I think there are about 30% of science and engineering postdocs and PhDs who fall into the track of academia, and less than 1% who make it as tenured professors. And so that leaves over 70% pursuing careers outside academia. So whether that's industry, third sector, the medical sector. And within that, there's a much smaller percentage pursuing the path of entrepreneurship. Um, and of course, it's a daunting process, but then it sounds like so is becoming a professor a daunting process. But leaving that aside, if you just imagine for a second that you have made a significant discovery, or you've created something that can bring an enormous amount of impact at scale for the for the whole world. So, for example, the photograph here in the picture, you all might recognize it. It's the sky above San Francisco just about a week ago, and it's still kind of cleaning itself up. But if you came up with a solution that could save gigatons of worth of CO2, or have discovered a drug that can save people's lives in a faster, better, cheaper manner, then perhaps business or entrepreneurship could be the best vehicle for actually realizing that impact. Uh, it's it's largely a thing to do with incentives, and how all incentives are aligned through the world of business, which sometimes falls through in other areas. Um, and particularly now, more than ever, when you're seeing the confluence of disciplines, so science and engineering coming together, so bio and engineering coming together, material sciences and computer sciences coming together, that field for research, discovery, and bringing your research to market, there's so much more firepower than there ever has been, before, which is why for us at Will Be, we truly think that science will drive the future of innovation as it has, but it'll be scientists who will be at the forefront of this, and mostly, science entrepreneurs. And with that, at Will Be, we are committed to helping entrepreneurial scientists excel. And that's really through a couple of ways. And from the get-go, it's by preparing you with the right skills through some of the master classes that we run. In fact, two of the folks here today will be attending, have been selected for this course, which we're starting next week, Lauren and Karts. And which is great to have you guys here today as well. And then when you're ready to build a company, we help you build the company, get investment ready, and then invest in you alongside others, and then help you scale. So that's really what we do at Will Be. It's really all about building science companies. And building a science venture is a bit difficult. That was a Freudian slip. It is difficult, but it's also different to building a tech company. And I think the biggest thing is that the word science, it's the very thing that differentiates you and acts like your moat. The very thing that makes it, as an investor, a very exciting asset class to be investing in, but also a very risky one, because it's the very thing that can hold you back while building your company. But really, the first question that you could be asking yourselves, and that's what we ask as well, the many potential founders that we meet with, is whether this is the right path for you. And there's no black and white answer, because if there was, we would have perfected the science of entrepreneurship, and that's not the case. But I would say, and I think many within the industry would probably share a similar view, that there are a couple of things or characteristics that could help you ascertain whether this is the right fit for you. And I'll pick on three, which to me are particularly important. And the first one being purpose, which is really the why. What is that big driver that's compelling you to work day and night to achieve the ambitions that you're looking to achieve? And I'd say that's true not just for entrepreneurship; it's true for life, really. The second piece is endurance. There are many highs and lows. There are many yeses and no's. So you could have raised your first round of funding. You could have secured your co-founder, your first team member, your first client, but you could very well have lost all your money and need to be scrambling for more. You could receive 100 rejections before you receive, a yes. You could have broken up with your co-founder within the first 12 months of your business. And these are things that we see every day with the companies and founders that we work with. And it's how do you, is A, do you enjoy that, frankly speaking, and B, can you endure it without, losing your eye on the ball. And the third piece, which is an interesting one, and I think something that I've learned more over time, and not perhaps something I would have thought of at the get-go, is storytelling. And that's really your narrative. So what can you weave together the different pieces of your research, your work, your life into a compelling story, compelling enough that, co-founders want to join you to achieve your purpose. Investors want to invest in you, and employees want to work with you, and customers want to buy your solution. So these are three things that are probably best to think about. You may not have the answers immediately. And frankly, I think ultimately you won't know until you don't try. So, and that's the case even perhaps while you were considering doing, the various programs that you're doing now. So assuming that, you're in it to win it, and you're committed to this path, then building a company is obviously a linear process, right? From incorporation through to IPO. Unfortunately, it's not at all. And luckily, none of you, I think, have done an MBA, or maybe some of you have. But the MBA always makes you think that it is something like this, but it's definitely not. It's probably closer to you running several experiments at once. And it's probably closer to something like this. And this is the spinning plates. So you're spinning several plates all at once, some on your nose while you're on your toes, and also while you're looking good through the whole process. And you're doing this alone. You're probably doing this, in a team of two. But eventually you need to be able to do it, something like this. And when you're spinning all these plates, some are naturally going to fall and break. Some are naturally going to just fall out of place. So how do you continuously tweak and adjust in order to maintain that harmonious state? And even when you do maintain that harmonious state, the chances are that it's not going to last very long. And then you'll have to start all over again. And that is, I think that is really the adventure, so to speak, of building your own company. It's also the very thing that can scare you from building your own company. But I think once you understand what those plates are and who are you spinning them with, it can make a whole lot of sense in terms of achieving the vision that you're trying to achieve. So the thing with the science venture per se is understanding what plates are. And they're really, without getting into the trap of frameworks, I'd say there are probably 6 things that you're really thinking about. And all these 6 things, I would say 5 of these 6 things are common to any company, irrespective of whether you're a scientist or not. It's the science piece that gets added in for when you're building a science venture, along with a couple of other things. So while looking at these 6 things, and some of you are already on your entrepreneurial journey, so you'll be familiar with this. I think the most important thing at the outset is understanding what is your product, what's your value proposition. And that's often where we find scientists get a bit, let's say, confused, because you end up focusing a lot on the science and not necessarily on the product. And the two are very different. Science is what underpins your company and might act as your differentiator and might have an IP, but it really doesn't matter unless you have a compelling value proposition, which is the product, and you're solving a real problem, a problem that the market recognizes and the market is willing to purchase. And so without those two things, the science won't add, won't really mean as much. So you're spinning, so you have a clear value proposition. That means you're solving a real problem that's worth solving, that can drive impact at scale. And you have a science that underpins that, that's defensible and that can be implemented at scale, perhaps also at cost. You're serving a market that wants to buy your product over competition. And you're doing this in a market that's favorable to you. So from a geopolitical perspective, you're thinking about the regulatory climate. You're thinking about the timing. And that's quite pertinent when it comes to life sciences companies. But even yet, you're looking at material sciences or even climate. And then you have capital, because you need money in order to build a company. And that money tends to come from public sources or grant funding at the outset, which is a process I think everyone's probably familiar with, because that's probably how you're doing what you're doing today. But it's about, when you're building a business, it's about getting private funding and understanding what that path to private funding is, and who those investors are and how do they align to your vision. And then the last piece that you're spinning, and ultimately it's probably the holy grail of everything that you're trying to achieve is the team, because ultimately your ability to try and spin all these plates at once is a question of if you have the right team to be able to execute on the vision. So just tying all those things together, all these elements, you can just think of them as levers. And these levers, you can either create risk, and the flip side of the coin, they're creating value, or they're creating return. So what you're trying to do at all times is to minimize your risk, your product risk, your science risk, your market risk, geopolitical risk, capital risk, team risk. Or the flip side of it is you're trying to maximize return across all these factors. And perfect alignment is virtually impossible, but you're trying to do it in a way that's allowing you to grow and allowing you to essentially achieve the goal that you probably set out for yourself. And that's what it's all about. But it's not that easy. But that's really what we strive to do in terms of helping entrepreneurs and science entrepreneurs while building their companies. And ultimately, the reason we do it is because we see that there's an enormous amount of impact that can be created through research being brought to market, and an enormous amount of value that can be created for every stakeholder that's involved in that process. And that can be done at scale. So I'll pause there, because I think I've spoken for quite a few minutes and probably fast, but that's just a little a starter in terms of how we think about science entrepreneurship and what we're doing at Wilby and why we're doing it. I'd love to hear, and I haven't had a chance to see any questions come through as yet, but I'll stop sharing so we can move into Q&A.
So, by all means, ask questions, ladies. What do you have burning? Just unmute yourself and ask that question.
And while you're asking, I'm looking at some of the responses.
Okay, I'll ask a question. When you're looking for co-founders and people to work with, would you advise trying to find people who are outside the academic world? Or do you want to find like-minded people within academia and kind of learn together?
As co-founders, is that the question? Yeah, I think well, it depends really on what it is that what's the skill set that's missing from the team or from the founding team at present, and therefore who can fill that gap. Is it someone with a similar skill set as you, or is it someone with a completely different skill set? And if that is the business skill set, can you find that within the academic environment? And chances are it's not common. So therefore, who would be the right person to be teaming up with? That, that said, what we've seen in the companies and founders we've worked with, sometimes it is the scientific team that are the founders, but you bring in your founding team members that might be helping on some of the other aspects of building out the company. And they don't necessarily come on board as co-founders. And you might bring on board a co-founder later on in the journey, when you really need that person because you've proven the science, and now you're looking at really commercializing and the sales aspect.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, but does that help?
I think so, yes. It's the idea that you start and you get to a proof of concept and work out your value proposition, and then you can look around for the skills. You don't need to have that necessarily to start out with.
No, unless you're unable to define the value proposition yourself. I think that's the key. And I think that's the piece which is probably the most important piece to be working on as an early founder or as someone who's interested in this space, is really defining that value proposition. Yeah.
Thank you.
Can I jump in with a kind of follow-up question to that?
Yeah, please. And it would be great to see everyone's faces as well, if you all feel comfortable.
So sticking with the co-founders idea, so let's say you're in a situation where you need some co-founders, you've got a rough idea what kind of skills you're looking for in your co-founders, but you don't know anybody like that. How do you go about finding them, figuring out who's best, having those conversations where you're trying to entice people in, but you don't know if you are going to get on with them well enough, if they're going to be a good enough fit yet, so you don't want to promise too much, etc., etc. How do you navigate all that?
Big. I mean, super important question. So you could do that yourself by attending events like this and several others of a similar nature. You could work with companies like us. That's what we help our founders do, because often they are solo when we meet them, but then we help put the team together. And likewise, you might have similar opportunities within the university itself. I think it is hard to find out immediately if the person is the right fit for you, because and you've probably heard this very often, is that it is a partnership, a true partnership. So it's very much like you'd have with a significant other. So it's that takes a bit of time and testing to see if it works out or it doesn't work out. We have seen several founder relationships collapse even before the product has come to market. And we've even seen it collapse when the first round of fundraising has happened, because suddenly money's in the bank and people change. And then, if you haven't set up yourselves, legally speaking, in the right manner, things can get, hairy and ugly as well. So I think equipping yourselves with knowledge about what it means to build a team and what are the right roles that I need and at what stage and what does that relationship look like is something that's freely available, through conversations like this, but even online. And that can really, really help you. So a classic mistake that I call it a mistake, I think some people probably have different opinions, is that you split equity equally, with your co-founders. And that could, in rare circumstances, work well if you have sufficient bylaws, so to speak, defined that outline, in the case of, for example, a major decision, who has the veto right, so to speak. But otherwise, particularly when there are 3 founders, the last thing we would recommend is splitting your equity, equally. it doesn't help in terms of alignment of objectives. But anyway, I can go on more on that if that's something someone's particularly like facing as a problem.
So what is recommended if it's not equally?
You'd well, I think it depends on what roles the people are playing on the team, right? If you have started the company as 2 people or as 3 people, then you're trying to carve out what role is each one playing, and therefore what should the equity split be like. If you do it equally, like I said, then you still need to definitely outline the edge cases which do arise in the case of building a company. So who takes the decision on the investors? Who takes the decision on hiring? Who has the final say on matters like this? That becomes quite important. And then you also hedge yourself by doing a vesting, having a vesting scheme in place. I don't know if folks are familiar with that at all, having a vesting. So that's quite common in startup parlance, where as co-founders of a company, you all would be on a vesting schedule, which essentially means that, if you and your co-founder have 51% of the company, for example, at the outset, then that equity would get vested over a period of time. That could be 3 years, that could be 5 years, but it'll be vested over a period of time based on milestones that are achieved. That's kind of a foolproof method just to help ensure that everyone's pulling their weight to actually build the business. And in case something happens for whatever reasons, there are clauses in place so that you could have an amicable exit of the relationship, or fine tuning of the cap table. I've gotten way too much into legal speak, so I'll switch over. Card asked a few questions in the chat. How do we find out if there's a value to your proposition? I think the only way you could do that is by asking and testing it with the person who's actually going to be buying your product or your service. That's the only way you can validate if there's something to your proposition. If you're building something entirely new that's never been done before, that's often hard to do because sometimes you don't know what you don't know. In which case you definitely need to have a very, very compelling narrative and a compelling story to have everyone invest in you and believe that